about the United Nations, it is helpful to know which part of the organization I come from. As introduced, I am the Deputy Director in the Africa 1 Division in the Department of Political Affairs, which is in the Secretariat. We cover 26 countries, most in half of eastern half of Africa, which includes Egypt and countries in the Horn of Africa, the Great Lakes, Eastern and Southern Africa, as some colleagues may be aware. For a decade leading up to the so-called Arab Spring, the United Nations Arab Human Development Report called attention to the problems and warned of the pressures building towards explosion. Sponsored by UNDP and authored by scholars from the Arab world, these reports spurred public debates and served as an effective platform for policy dialogue. The catalyst for the founding series was a sense of urgency among Arab thinkers about the precipitous situation of Arab countries at the start of a new millennium. So what is the role of the United Nations? The political transformations in the Arab world are playing out in very different ways, and United Nations engagement in each country is conceived on a case-by-case basis. At the same time, given that many Arab states share some common features, there are broader trends that can be identified, and which inform UN engagement. The UN's long-term political strategy in support of transitions is to contribute to building a just and democratic society for development. Since UN assistance should be explicitly requested by local actors and never imposed, the United Nations works to build trust, to build partnerships with the countries. Such an approach is fully aligned with supporting nations in transition, which is one of the priorities of the Secretary General identified for his second term. Despite much uncertainty in countries of the Arab awakening, the UN agencies, funds, and programs are active in the countries, and they're known collectively as the UN country teams. So, let us put the Arab awakening in historical perspective. Revolutions and political transitions are complex phenomena that take years, if not decades, to show their full effects. There will be progress and setbacks. Unlike earlier revolution, the French Revolution, Spanish, Mexican, Bolshevik, you name it, the Arab awakenings are taking place after the signing of the UN Charter and development of international laws, norms, and values, including a much stronger international human rights framework. Another significant difference is that information technology has rapidly sped up information exchange. We have seen the impact of social media such as Facebook and Twitter in mobilizing massive protest movements in so many countries around the world. In revolution or war, competing groups often unite in a big national effort. What follows, however, is the hardest part: building a political mechanism to resolve differences. In the absence of an inclusive parliament, alternative short-term structures are usually required to deal with immediate crises. Several transitions are characterized by considerable uncertainty and challenges. A genuine dialogue has yet to emerge in some, partly due to suspicions on both sides of the political divide, lack of inclusiveness, and rejection of the mechanisms that currently exist. The second revolutionary phase in many countries has been a struggle to control the new state, which is seen as a condition for political survival in the aftermath of popular revolutions. Elections, sometimes held before new political groupings had the chance to mature, or before principles were agreed among major social interests, became in some places winner-take-all events that exacerbated tensions. The only sustainable solution to this dilemma is pluralism, limiting the reach of the state by ensuring that it is bound by a social contract where individual rights are respected, where different groups, particularly minorities, will trust that state institution would not threaten their existence. All too often, however, governments adopt a repressive approach instead of accommodation and dialogue. On Egypt, the Secretary General recently underlined that one of the central challenges moving forward is pluralism, the guarantee that all voices are heard, represented, and have a stake in a system, regardless of political or religious affiliation. The Secretary General has also underlined the crucial need to guarantee the political space on which a stable and inclusive democracy can be built. In addition, the transitions in Arab world have brought to the fore the debate over the role of Islam in politics. This has frequently placed so-called secularist and Islamist categorical terms that mask significant diversity in adversarial positions. Despite the historical repression of political Islam by the authoritarian regimes in a region, Islamist parties are still better organized than other political entities and have genuine popular roots, providing them easier routes to power in post-Arab Spring elections. However, the role of Islam remains contentious, with deeply divided popular views. For example, regarding attempts to enshrine Islamic values in national constitution. While participation in Islamic parties such as the Muslim Brotherhood in the political process is essential, their behavior upon assuming power in Egypt has stoked suspicions and fears in other sectors of society as to their true intentions. Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia have engaged in a process of redefining their national and social identities and considering how Islam will be reflected and interpreted in the constitution and their other legislative processes. Between the challenges to these processes and increasing insecurity across North Africa and the Sahel region, many commentators seem to be longing for the so-called stability that the old regimes provided. Rising insecurity across North Africa and the Sahel region has exacerbated an already volatile situation. This includes advances by extremists aligned with Al-Qaeda in Maghreb, known by their acronym AKIM, in northern Mali and along the Algerian border, political assassinations in Tunisia, attacks on government facilities in Egypt, and I should mention attacks against tourists for the first time in the Sinai over the weekend, the proliferation of arms and violence, also against members of the diplomatic community in Libya, and attacks on the Amenas facility in Algeria. Extremists have shown their ability to exploit uncertain political environments and vast and porous borders in an effort to derail progress and spread chaos. Violent extremist movements of multiple stripes, who were initially seen as having suffered a strategic setback during the Arab awakening, are finding new avenues for their recruitment and activities. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, such as those in Somalia, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Gaza, Mali, Mauritania, made public statements denouncing the developments in Egypt and calling on its supporters to take up arms against the enemies, in quote, of Islam. The reduction of political space anywhere gives radical groups a fertile recruitment ground. Any strategy that would effectively deal with these threats requires close regional and inter-regional cooperation and recognition that the socio-political dynamics of North Africa have far-reaching implications in places like the Sahel region and the Middle East. Regional architecture. Cooperation with regional organizations has long been a touchstone of the work of the United Nations, as recognized in Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter and numerous resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. In many ways, the United Nations and regional organizations have unique and complementary capacities that, when properly coordinated, can contribute decisively to the prevention and management of armed conflict. The Arab Arab awakening has been a rejection of dictatorial regimes that for decades ignored or actively repressed popular will and democratic participation in affairs of nation and state. The Arab awakening has also been a journey of discovery, allowing disparate groups in divided society to explore ways in which they might live together peacefully for the common good. Constitutional reform is therefore central to transitions in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Yemen. One of the foremost tasks and challenges for reformers is the creation of a new legitimate constitutional order that will redefine the relationship between citizens and government, as well as design a new system and structure of government, determine how to share wealth and power among the different orders of government, establish rules and limitations on the exercise of power, and create a system to enable power to change hands peacefully, and guarantee fundamental rights and freedom to be enjoyed by the people. In the countries of the Arab awakening, citizens are demanding transparency, accountability, and rights. For societies that have lived under the boot of a dictator for decades, the process is an opportunity to redefine the nation itself. What is the nature of citizenship, identity, and religion? What are the core values of the nation itself? On what terms can historically fragmented people peacefully coexist? How do previously politically marginalized groups of citizens gain rights and political access? The aftermath of the Arab awakening has not been stabilized yet. We still see political instability and the yearning for greater participatory democracy still rising among the people. So their concerns and aspirations have not yet been properly met and addressed. The North Africa and Middle East is unlikely to find equilibrium in the near future. Even assuming no new dramatic developments, the region's difficulties are likely to intensify and become more acute in the coming years. The dire socioeconomic situation in many countries of the region, the high unemployment rate, income inequality with macroeconomic indicators trending in the wrong direction, will likely remain an important source of instability. The underlying demographic time bomb, as previously mentioned, cannot be ignored. There are threats to the transitions: rise of restrictive laws, limitations on the press, restrictions on civil society, the threat of Islamist militias, and a rise of intercommunal violence. One key lesson over the last 3 years is the need for the international community to be modest and follow the lead of those fighting for democratization and liberalization on the ground. Transitions cannot just be elections and constitutions. They must be rooted in people themselves. One of the central challenges for the states in the region is to create a pluralist political system where different voices are heard regardless of political religious affiliation. Freedom and democracies are much more than majority rule or elections. Pluralism is critical. Human rights, including minority rights, civil liberties, and shared decision-making are key components of democratic societies. The strengthening of democratic institutions and development of civil society is vital to creating space where citizens feel empowered. There are heavy costs in having a disenfranchised population. Similarly, advancing women's rights is not a question of choice. It is the duty of every government and a priority for the United Nations. Despite the challenges we face across the region, there are also reasons to be hopeful. The Arab awakening is an opportunity to respond to the people's call for peace, democracy, prosperity, and security, but only if the international community and the states in the region really seize this opportunity. The people in MENA region can count on the United Nations support as they undertake these unprecedented political transitions.